The movie begins with Alex Martin, a determined journalist, stuck at an airport because a storm has canceled all flights. She's in a hurry. Her wedding is the next day in Denver. Frustrated, she calls her fiancé to explain the situation and promises she'll find a way to get there no matter what. Across the terminal, Ben Bass, a neurosurgeon, is also desperate. He has a life-saving surgery scheduled for a young boy in Denver, and time is running out. Alex overhears Ben arguing with an airline attendant and sees an opportunity. She approaches him with a bold plan: charter a small plane together to reach Denver. Though hesitant, Ben agrees. He doesn't have a choice. Together, they head outside to find a pilot. There, they meet Walter, a retired Air Force pilot who works on his old rugged plane. Walter's dog runs up to greet them as they approach but barks at Ben, showing clear distrust. After boarding the small plane and settling in, they started their journey. Once they're in the air, the mood lightens. Alex talks about her recent photography assignment in New York, while Ben shares that he's originally from London but moved to the US after marrying an American. As they chat, turbulence hits, and the storm outside grows more intense. Suddenly, Walter struggles to communicate. Ben quickly realizes the pilot is having a stroke. He tries to stabilize him, but his efforts fail. Without control, the plane crashes into the snow-covered mountains. In moments, their world spirals into disaster. Hours after the crash, Ben regains consciousness, disoriented and in pain. He discovers that Walter, the pilot, has died from the crash, but miraculously, the dog has survived. Turning his attention to Alex, who is unconscious and bleeding, he sees her leg is badly injured. Frustrated, he pushes his emotions aside and focuses on survival. He treats her wounds as best as he can, stabilizing her leg with a makeshift brace. With the temperature dropping fast, he scavenges a lighter from Walter's belongings and uses plane fuel to start a fire. He checks his phone for a signal, but finds nothing. His strength fades, and he drifts into unconsciousness. By morning, the storm has passed, and sunlight pours into the wreckage. Ben steps outside for the first time and is hit by the harsh reality of their situation. They're stranded at the peak of a snow-covered mountain, surrounded by jagged cliffs and endless white. The sight shakes him, but he steadies himself and returns to the wreckage. After removing Walter's body, he buries him in the snow and says a quiet prayer, holding his hat in his hand. Back inside the plane, Ben sits near Alex and rests by the flickering fire. A few moments later, Alex stirs and finally wakes up, disoriented and at first unable to recognize Ben. He calms her down, explaining what happened, but her shock turns to despair as she realizes how isolated they are. Ben tries to stay optimistic, hoping a rescue team will find them. Alex, however, is consumed by worry, not just for herself, but for Mark, her fiancé, who has no idea she chartered the plane. She admits to Ben that Mark might not even know where to start looking for her, leaving their rescue up to pure chance. As days pass, the tension rises. Alex struggles with the confinement of the wreckage and grows restless, frustrated by their lack of options. Ben remains cautious, knowing her leg injury limits her mobility. One afternoon, as Ben sits in quiet frustration, he spots a plane flying high above them. His heart leaps as he scrambles to fire a flare, but the aircraft is too far to see them. The disappointment is crushing. They're running out of flares, and Ben warns Alex they can't afford to waste another. Desperate for answers, Ben decides to climb a nearby peak to get a better view of their surroundings. Before he leaves, Alex hands him her camera, hoping the zoom lens might reveal a way out. The climb is treacherous, and Ben narrowly avoids falling several times as loose rocks give way beneath him. At the top, his heart sinks. He scans the landscape with the camera, but finds no sign of civilization, only endless mountains and snow. Meanwhile, Alex, left alone in the wreckage, stumbles upon a recorder among Ben's belongings. Curious, she plays it and hears the voice of a woman speaking warmly to Ben. Alex pieces together that the voice belongs to his wife, but the melancholy tone hints at heartbreak. She assumes they are estranged or divorced, increasing her curiosity about why Ben is so protective. Suddenly, the dog starts barking, and scratching noises outside the plane put Alex on edge. The source of the disturbance soon becomes clear. A cougar prowls outside, drawn by the scent of food. The barking dog confronts the predator, rushing out of the wreckage to defend Alex. She hears its pained yelps as the cougar turns its attention to the plane. Acting quickly, Alex grabs a flare gun and fires just as the cougar lunges at her, managing to wound the animal and drive it away. Ben, hearing the shot, rushes back down the mountain, moving as fast as he can through the treacherous terrain. When he returns, he's alarmed by the blood around the wreckage, but relieved to find Alex alive. The dog, however, is injured. Ben tends to its wounds using what little medical supplies they have and retrieves the cougar's body. That night, he cooks the meat over the fire, providing much-needed food for them and the dog for a few days. As they eat, Alex probes Ben about his personal life, asking about the woman in the recording. Ben reveals little, only that his wife's name is Sarah, and they have no children. Sensing his reluctance, Alex shifts the conversation to their next steps. She argues that staying at the wreckage will only delay the inevitable. They'll run out of food before anyone finds them. Ben pushes back, believing rescue is still their best hope. The debate becomes heated, with Ben accusing Alex of being reckless and selfish, while she counters by saying he's too afraid to take action. The tension eventually boils over, leaving both of them emotionally drained. As Alex lies awake that night, her resolve hardens. She knows they can't wait any longer. At first light, she leaves the wreckage and starts making her way down the mountain. Soon after, Ben wakes to find Alex and the dog gone, with only a hastily written note saying she's leaving to find help. A wave of frustration hits Ben. He can't believe Alex would risk such a dangerous trek on her injured leg, especially in the brutal cold and across treacherous slopes. For a moment, anger overtakes him, and he convinces himself he doesn't care. But as the silence of the mountain settles around him, his frustration fades, and he sets out after her. Meanwhile, Alex trudges through the deep snow with sheer determination. Her injured leg slows her progress, but she keeps moving. Before long, Ben catches up to her. His anger fades when he sees she's still alive, and relief washes over him. He embraces her, assuring her he's glad she's okay. Walking together through the snow proves grueling. At first, they talk to pass the time, but the harsh conditions soon leave them in silence. Their footsteps crunch against the icy ground, each step feeling heavier than the last. Hours later, they reach the tree line, and the dog leads them to a cave for shelter. Inside the cave, Ben starts a fire and checks Alex's leg, noting it's healing but still fragile. As he examines her injury, Alex shifts uncomfortably, wearing only her fancy underwear. Trying to break the tension, she jokes that maybe he isn't really a doctor and just wants an excuse to get her clothes off. Ben smirks and replies that her clothes aren't that interesting anyway. As the night deepens, exhaustion settles over them. The next morning, sunlight filters into the cave. Alex takes her camera to scout the surroundings. Through the zoom lens, she spots a distant flash of light, possibly from something man-made. Excited, she shows Ben, and they decide to head toward it, though it's far away. As they gather their things to leave, Alex casually asks Ben about his wife, noting that he still wears his wedding ring but never mentions her. He avoids answering, and though she lets it go, her curiosity lingers. After hours of descending through the rugged terrain, they reach a dead end, a cliff with a frozen river below. Frustrated and tired, Alex vents her fear and exhaustion, confessing she's scared they won't survive. Ben tells her she needs to stop being reckless, insisting they can make it if they stay careful. They argue briefly before both fall into silence, worn out by the emotional strain. Alex eventually apologizes for her outburst, and Ben reassures her he understands. As they rest, Alex notices the dog is missing and insists Ben go look for him. Reluctantly, Ben follows the dog's tracks and finds the dog nearby. From there, he spots a log cabin in the distance, nestled in the woods. Filled with excitement, he runs toward it, discovering the door open, but the place empty. Meanwhile, at the cliff, Alex hears a strange crackling sound. Brushing away snow, she realizes with horror that she's standing on thin ice. She screams for Ben, but before she can react, the ice gives way, plunging her into the freezing water. Hearing the commotion, Ben sprints toward her and spots the hole in the ice. Breaking through the brittle ice layer, he lunges forward, reaching into the freezing water to pull her out. Desperate to save her, Ben carries Alex to the cabin and lays her near the fire. He wraps her in blankets and starts warming her, determined not to lose her. The place is furnished but abandoned, untouched for years. Ben stays close, watching over Alex, hoping for any sign of movement. Restless, Ben sits at an old piano in the corner and begins pressing the keys. After a few moments, the silence is broken as Alex stirs. Relief floods over him. He doesn't know if he could have gone on without her. Alex wakes up groggy, momentarily thinking they've been rescued. But when Ben explains their situation, reality sets in. She's weak, dizzy, and malnourished. Without hesitation, Ben heats soup and gives it to her, making sure she eats every bite before even thinking about himself. The way he cares for her makes her feel something unfamiliar, something more than just survival. They talk about their next move as she eats and slowly regains her strength. Ben believes they should rest and wait for better conditions, though he doesn't admit his real fear. Alex is too weak to make it much farther. The next day, Ben heads out to hunt with the dog, while Alex stays behind. Restless, she finds Ben's recorder again and presses play. A woman's voice fills the silence, gentle but heavy with sadness. Before she can process it fully, Ben returns earlier than expected and catches her. His face darkens. Alex quickly apologizes, saying she only wanted to know more about him. They might not survive, and yet she barely knows anything about the man who's been saving her life. Seeing her desperation, Ben decides to tell her the truth. The woman in the recording was his wife, Sarah. She had a brain tumor. He was her doctor, but he couldn't save her. The guilt still haunts him, and saving Alex feels like his chance to make things right. Feeling the weight of his pain, Alex reaches for him. A moment of understanding turns into something deeper as she kisses him, and he doesn't pull away. For the first time since the crash, nothing else matters. The next morning, Alex wakes first and quietly snaps a picture of Ben sleeping. When he stirs, she tells him she thinks they must be near civilization. She urges him to go ahead without her. She'll stay behind and wait. Ben refuses, worried about leaving her alone, but Alex insists, determined not to slow him down. Finally, thinking it's the best choice, Ben sets out alone, but after a few steps, doubt creeps in. He replays their moments together, the struggles, the trust they've built, and the thought of leaving her behind feels wrong. With a deep breath, he turns back. He tells her they can't do this alone. Whatever happens, they'll face it together. Their journey becomes harder than ever. Weak and starving, Alex can barely stand. When they pause to rest under a tree, exhaustion overtakes them, and they both drift into unconsciousness. Hours later, the dog barks, tugging at Ben's jacket and dragging him until he rolls into the snow. He jolts awake, struggling to his feet. In the distance, beyond the trees, he spots a timber factory. His heart races as he hurries back to Alex, shaking her awake and pointing toward it. She's weak, but the sight gives her the strength to keep going. With renewed determination, they press forward. But after a few hours, the dog disappears again. Alex urges Ben to go find him. He eventually spots the dog and starts making his way back when suddenly his foot sinks. A bear trap snaps shut around his leg. Pain shoots through him as he collapses, unable to break free. Hearing his cries, Alex drags herself toward him and tries to pry the trap open, but it won't budge. Ben is losing blood fast. He needs help. Summoning every bit of strength left, Alex stumbles toward the factory. Her vision blurs, her body barely holding on. Just as she's about to collapse, a truck appears in the distance. She waves frantically, and the driver sees her. Help has finally arrived. Ben wakes up in a hospital bed, disoriented. As the fog clears from his mind, his first thought is Alex. Ignoring his own pain, he asks a nurse where she is and heads straight to her room. He steps inside and pulls her into a tight embrace, overwhelmed with relief. Before they can speak, a man steps out of the hospital bathroom. It's Mark, Alex's fiancé. His greeting is polite but cold, his expression unreadable. Ben says nothing and quietly leaves. Time passes and life resumes. Ben returns to London but can't perform surgery due to frostbite, so he becomes a trauma consultant. He adopts the dog, the only living link to the mountain, and tries to move on. Alex struggles to return to normal life, surrounded by people yet feeling more alone than ever. She finds comfort nowhere, not even in Mark, who tries but doesn't understand. The nightmares don't stop. She wakes up, reaching for something or someone who isn't there. She tries calling Ben, but he never answers. To him, silence is the only way to move on. He assumes she married Mark, living the life she was always meant to. Answering her calls would only reopen wounds he's trying to close. More time passes, but Alex can't ignore what she already knows. She and Mark are no longer the same. The mountain changed her in ways she can't explain, and whatever love they once had is gone. Mark senses the distance growing between them and finally voices what they've both been avoiding. He always believed he would love her no matter what she lost, but now he sees she has lost something far greater, her heart. She doesn't deny it. They separate, closing a chapter that no longer fits. One day, while sorting through her things, Alex develops the photos she took on the mountain. On impulse, she selects a few and sends them to Ben with a special note. Ben receives them in the mail and just stares. His hands tremble slightly as he flips through the images, each one pulling him back to a moment that never truly left him. He had convinced himself that shutting her out was the right choice. Now, he isn't so sure. Without thinking twice, he picks up the phone and dials her number for the first time. Weeks later, they meet in a quiet restaurant in Manhattan. At first, there's hesitation and awkwardness between them, but it doesn't take long for the walls to break down. They talk for hours, catching up on everything they never said. Ben admits he never called because he thought she had moved on, convinced she was already married. But Alex shakes her head. She can't go through with it. She tells him she loved him on the mountain, but now, away from survival, she doesn't know if what they felt was real or just a result of their circumstances. Ben nods. Their bond was forged in survival, built in the face of life and death, but now everything feels different. Deep down, he knows the truth. What they felt was real. They leave with a hug, both carrying the weight of unspoken emotions, both trying to convince themselves this is how it has to be. But as they walk away, something shifts. Alex slows, and she turns, just as Ben does the same. Their eyes meet, and for a moment, time stands still. Everything is understood. It was never just survival, it was always love.